In the quiet lobby of a Florida condo, a fresh sign shouted, "Nitrogen monoxide pets." Eleanor Hayes clutched Henry's leash-hurt chocolate lab, a trained service dog who studied her balance and alerted her to dangerous blood sugar drops. A volunteer guard stepped forward, palm up. "Rules are rules," he said, blocking the elevator. Ellie's chest tightened. She had letters, training logs, years of medical notes. None of that mattered to a board that saw Henry as simply a pet. What happened next wasn't a shouting match. It was a lesson in federal law and how one voice can reshape a whole community. Asterisk if this story resonates. Please like, subscribe, and share it with anyone living under HOA rules. I'm here to help you navigate life with clarity and compassion. This video isn't legal advice, but it is practical guidance. Stay to the end for a simple, senior-friendly rights checklist you can use. Hello friends. I'm Dr. Grace Bennett. I've spent years caring for older adults and their families, and I've learned that health isn't just about medicine, it's about dignity, safety, and the calm assurance that you can live your life on your terms. Today, I want to share a story that begins with a no pet sign and ends with a community finding its compassion and its compliance. This story is about Eleanor Ellie Hayes, 72 years old, a retired piano teacher from Ohio, who moved to coastal Florida after her husband passed. Ellie is practical, kind, and stubborn in all the right ways. She walks with a gentle sway because of balance issues after a minor stroke, and she manages type 1 diabetes with grace and grit. Her service dog, Henry, is a chocolate lab with a glossy coat and the eyes of an old soul. Henry nudges Ellie's hand when her blood sugar dips. He braces when she stands. He's a quiet hero, trained to do tasks that protect her health and independence. When Ellie moved into the Seabreeze Towers condominium, she read the HOA rules like a student preparing for an exam. The rulebook was thick. The no pets line was bold, but she also knew her rights. Henry wasn't a pet. He was a service dog. And in housing, the Federal Fair Housing Act safeguards people like Ellie by requiring communities, including HOAs and condo associations, to make reasonable accommodations for assistance animals, which include service dogs and emotional support. Animals. That's the law, and it exists for a deeply human reason. Still, rules on paper often collide with fear and habit in real life. Section 1. The day the sign went up, it was a Tuesday with salt on the air and sunlight bouncing off the pool. Ellie stopped for her mail. A new sign hung near the elevator. Nitrogen monoxide pets allowed, no exceptions. Henry stood at her left, steady as ever, his blue vest neat, his ID tag clipped for visibility. Ellie's heart gave a small, old tremor. She breathed. Through it the volunteer lobby guard, a big man named Jeff with kind eyes and an anxious smile, noticed Henry. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the board's been strict. They told me no pets in the common areas." "Henry isn't a pet," Ellie answered, voice polite and measured. "He's a service dog." Jeff's face turned apologetic and worried. "I don't want to get in trouble," he said. "Could you use the back entrance?" Ellie tightened her hold on the mail. She thought about the back entrance, the humid corridor by the dumpsters, the sticky door that sometimes jammed, the uneven steps she used to trip over before Henry learned to slow her pace. She could feel a familiar blend of sadness and resolve. Rising, "Jeff," she said, "I understand you're following directions, but I'll take the elevator. If there's a problem, the board can call me." She stepped in. The doors sighed shut. Henry leaned ever so slightly against her calf, anchoring her in that quiet, silver boxed out section 2. The letter on her door, the letter came before dinner, white envelope. The HOO seal at the top. Ellie placed the envelope on the table and fed Henry first. 1 scoop, 2 scoops, a splash of warm water. He ate without anxiety, the way living creatures do when they feel safe. After he settled, she opened the letter. Dear Miss Hayes, it has come to our attention that you have brought a pet onto the premises. Our bylaws strictly prohibit pets in common areas and residential units. Please remove the animal immediately to avoid fines or further action. Failure to comply may result in enforcement measures as outlined in our governing documents. Sincerely, Barbara Whitaker, President, Sabreeze Towers Condo Association. Ellie read it twice, the words blurring just slightly at the edges. She placed the letter on the counter and touched Henry's paw. He lifted his head, attentive. Not today, she whispered. We're okay. We have the law. Still, the law can feel like a distant lighthouse when you're standing in a storm. Ellie needed clarity. She needed a path. Section 3. A cup of tea, a phone call, and a plan. Ellie called her daughter, Carolyn, a nurse in Denver who loves to solve puzzles. Carolyn answered on the second ring. Mom, everything all right? Ellie explained. Carolyn really listened without rushing her. Mom, she said, I'm proud of you for staying calm. Here's what we do. First, we don't send angry emails. We send a reasonable accommodation request, simple, kind, firm. You also call Dr. Patel and ask for a letter stating you have a disability and that Henry assists you with specific tasks. No diagnosis details, just the essentials. And Mom, remember, it's not an argument, it's a process. Ellie wrote the steps on a notepad. She added a heart next to call Dr. Patel. Section 4. Understanding the law, plain and simple before. Bed. Ellie turned on a video, one of my Know Your Rights explainers about assistance animals in housing. She took notes in neat cursive. Here's the essence of what she heard. The Fair Housing Act, FHA, requires housing providers, including HOAs and condo associations, to make reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities. That includes allowing assistance animals. Even if a no pets policy exists, assistance animals under the FHA include service dogs and emotional support animals. The ADA's definition of a service animal is a dog trained to do work or perform tasks for a person with a disability. HUD's guidance for housing is broader, recognizing assistance animals that provide support, including emotional support. That alleviates the symptoms or effects of a disability. Housing providers can ask for reliable documentation if the disability or the need for the animal isn't obvious. They can't demand details about diagnoses. They can't require certification or special vests. They can't charge pet fees or impose breed, size, or weight restrictions on assistance animals. They can ask for vaccination records and require that the animal be under control and housebroken. If an animal poses a direct threat or causes significant property damage that can't be reduced by another reasonable step, the provider can deny or revoke the accommodation. But they must base decisions on evidence, not assumptions or stereotypes. Ellie paused the video and smiled. You make it sound calm, she said to the screen. That wasn't an accident. Calm gives us room to breathe. Section 5. The doctors. Note in the words that matter. The next morning, Ellie called her physician, Dr. Maya Patel, who had followed her for years and knew Henry's work intimately. Of course, Dr. Patel said, warm and certain. I'll write a brief letter. We'll state you have a disability under the Fair Housing Act and that Henry, a trained service dog, mitigates your symptoms by performing tasks, including balance support and blood glucose alerts. No diagnoses, just what the housing provider needs to evaluate the request. Thank you, Ellie said, her shoulders dropping. Ellie, Dr. Patel added, remember that asking for accommodation is not asking for a favor. It's asking for what the law provides so you can live safely. You've earned that? Ellie cried a little at that quiet tears that came from feeling seen. The letter arrived that afternoon via secure email. Sweet, factual, precise dot section. 6. The accommodation request Ellie typed slowly, mindful of every word. Dear Miss Whitaker and Seabreeze Towers Board, I am writing to request a reasonable accommodation under the Fair Housing Act. I have a disability, and my service dog, Henry, assists me by performing specific tasks related directly to my disability, including balance support and blood glucose alerts. He is housebroken, vaccinated, and under my control at all times. I've attached a letter from my physician verifying the need for Henry. Please let me know if you require any additional reliable documentation. I ask that Henry and I be permitted full access to my unit and common areas where residents are allowed to go. Thank you for your prompt attention. I'd also welcome an in-person conversation to make this process easier for everyone. Sincerely, Eleanor Hayes, Unit 12B phone 555-014-8893-HE. Attached Dr. Patel's letter, clicked send, and exhaled. Henry laid his head on her knee, as if to say, we're doing this together. Section 7. The first response, the board's reply, came too quickly to be careful. It was from Barbara Whitaker, the HOA president. Miss Hayes, we don't make exceptions. Our insurance carrier has advised us against animals. If we allow one, we'll have to allow all, and we'll lose control of the building. Furthermore, several residents have allergies, and the rules protect them. You may keep the dog only if you pay a $1,000 pet deposit and use the service entrance. Otherwise, we will proceed with fines. Board President Barbara Whitaker Ellie Reed. It twice, then 3 times, the way you do when you're trying not to scream. She called Carolyn. She called Dr. Patel. She poured tea and waited for her pulse to settle. I wish I could tell you Ellie marched downstairs and delivered a fiery speech, but that's not her way. Instead, she chose steadiness. She chose patience. Ellie contacted the local fair housing organization listed on HUD's website, the Gulf Coast Fair Housing Center. A counselor named Alicia Green returned her call that afternoon. Miss Hayes, Alicia said, you're doing everything right. The board can't charge a pet deposit for a service animal. They can't force you to use a back entrance. And they need to engage in an interactive process, meaning they talk with you, consider your request, and see if a reasonable accommodation is possible, which it almost certainly is. I can help you draft a reply, and if necessary, we can file a HUD complaint. Ellie took another page of notes. Alicia's voice was practical and kind, the way you want your guide to sound when you're walking through a maze. With Alicia's help, Ellie wrote the second letter. Dear Ms. Whitaker and Board, thank you for your response. I appreciate your concern for all residents, including those with allergies. The Fair Housing Act requires housing providers, including HOAs, to make reasonable accommodations for assistance animals. This includes permitting my service dog without pet fees and without limiting my access to common areas. HUD guidance clarifies that breed size and pet fees do not apply to assistance animals, and that housing providers must consider each request individually, engaging in an interactive process. I'm very willing to discuss practical steps to address concerns such as confirming Henry's vaccinations and ensuring he remains on leash and under control. Please let me know a time we can meet. If we cannot resolve this, I may need to seek assistance from the Gulf Coast Fair Housing Center or HUD. I hope we can work together. Sincerely. Eleanor Hayes. She read it aloud before sending to make sure it sounded like her. Steady, human, inviting. It did. The board scheduled a meeting for Friday at 4 p.m. Ellie wished the time were earlier. Late afternoons can be hard when blood sugars dip. She packed glucose tabs in her purse. Henry wore his vest. They entered the same lobby with the same sign, and Ellie felt neither bigger nor smaller, just ready. The conference room smelled faintly of lemons and new carpet. On one side sat Barbara Whitaker, whose hair was sprayed into stillness. Next to her was the property manager, Derek Collins, scanning a tablet. At the far end was Mr. Mandel, a board member with a kind gaze and a sharp, legal mind, the sort of person who never rushed to the end of a sentence. Ellie took a seat, and Henry settled in a perfect down at her feet. Barbara started briskly. Ms. Hayes, we respect your situation, but the building has rules. People buy here for peace and for the comfort of no animals. Allergies, fears, liabilities. It's not personal, it's policy. Ellie nodded and waited. I hear the concerns, she said. The law still applies. Derek glanced at his tablet. Our insurance might deny coverage if there are animals in hallways, he said. Mr. Mandel cleared his throat softly. Insurance carriers generally do not void policies because of assistance animals, he said. And the Fair Housing Act preempts policy terms that would discriminate. We should confirm with counsel, Barbara frowned. Even if it's legal, it's messy. Ellie folded her hands. I don't want mess, she replied gently. I want to live safely. My doctor has documented that Henry performs tasks mitigating my disability. I'm not asking for an exception to be special. I'm asking for an accommodation to be safe. Silence. A long one. Sometimes silence is where change begins. Mr. Mandel looked at Barbara. We need to consult our lawyer and HUD guidance. He said, if we're wrong, we should correct it. Barbara sighed, the kind of sigh that comes when the world won't stay inside the lines you drew for it. We'll review, she said. No fines for now. Ellie nodded, thanked them, and went home. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired, and then she made lemon chicken because tonight was for nourishment, not victory laps. On Monday, the board's attorney, a woman named Rachel Newing out of Tampa, sent a long, calm email with citations in a tone that suggested. She chose her words like lanterns on a path. Dear Board, I've reviewed Ms. Hayes' request and the governing law. Under the Fair Housing Act and HUD FHEO 2001 guidance, the association must consider reasonable accommodations for assistance animals. The no pets policy does not apply to assistance animals. The association cannot impose pet deposits or restrict access to common areas where residents are permitted. The association may require that the animal be under control, housebroken, and vaccinated per local law, and may hold the owner responsible for any actual property damage. Allergy concerns should be handled by reasonable, individualized measures. For example, not placing the animal and an allergic resident in immediate proximity during group events. Not categorical denials. Insurance issues typically do not supersede federal obligations without specific, demonstrable carrier requirements. I recommend granting Ms. Hayes' request, updating policies to reflect federal law, and training staff on the difference between pets, service animals, and emotional support animals. Respectfully, Rachel Nguyen. ESQ. The email did not say you were wrong, but it did something better. It said, here's the way forward. The association posted a notice inviting residents to a policy update session the following Thursday. Ellie almost didn't go. She feared it would feel like a trial. But sometimes healing requires showing up. About 30 people gathered. In the community room, Mr. Mandel facilitated. Barbara sat on the side, arms folded, watching the room like a school principal, trying not to show that she cared more than she let on. Rachel, the attorney, joined via Zoom on a projector. Rachel spoke plainly. She explained the Fair Housing Act, the difference between the ADA and HUD rules for housing, and what the association's responsibilities were. She reminded everyone that assistance animals are not pets. She talked about the interactive process. A woman in the second row, Linda Jacobs, raised her hand. I'm very allergic, she said. I moved here because of the no pet rule. What about me? Rachel nodded. Miss Jacobs, she said, your comfort matters. The law asks the association to consider both needs. Reasonable steps like informing residents when an assistance animal will be in a small meeting room can go a long way. Air purifiers, seating arrangements. But the law doesn't allow categorical bans, Linda exhaled. Okay, she said. I can live with that if it's managed. A gentleman named Tom Harris, a veteran with a cane, stood slowly. My neighbor's daughter has an emotional support cat, he said. Not a service animal, but it helps her panic attacks. Would this apply? Rachel explained that emotional support animals are also covered under the FHA as assistance animals, though the documentation standards differ slightly. The association evaluates each request, she said. We don't deny out of hand. In the back, a younger resident named Miguel asked, what if people lie? We've all seen those fake online certificates. Rachel's mouth tilted in a half smile. We don't rely on fake certificates, she said. We rely on a simple, reliable process. If the disability and need aren't obvious, the association can request documentation from a professional who can confirm that the individual has a disability and that that animal provides disability-related support or tasks. We keep it limited, confidential, and humane. Humane, that word landed softly in the room like a small bird finding a branch. After the meeting, Barbara approached Ellie. Her voice was quieter now. I'm not trying to be the villain, she said, eyes on the floor and then up again. I've run this building for 10 years. People call me at midnight. Pipes burst. Pools crack. I thought no pets meant fewer problems. I didn't understand the difference. Ellie nodded. I believe you, she said. This isn't easy. I didn't want to be a case. I just wanted to walk Henry to the mailbox without feeling like I was breaking the peace. Barbara nodded back. We'll fix the sign, she said. It should say what we mean. The next week, the lobby boasted 2 new signs. One was still neat and clear. Respect your neighbors. Nitrogen monoxide pets in common areas. The second sign, right beneath, read, service and assistance animals are welcome in compliance with federal law. Please. Keep them under control and clean up after them. It wasn't a manifesto. It was something better, a guideline that felt like an outstretched hand. Jeff, the volunteer guard, pointed at the sign when he saw Ellie that afternoon. Better, he said, grinning. No more back entrance. Never again, Ellie said. And they both laughed, the kind of laugh that comes when a tight muscle finally lets go. Life didn't turn into a storybook. Someone still complained when Henry's toenails clicked on the tile. Someone else left a snippy note on the bulletin board about new rules for some. But the world didn't end, the walls didn't crumble, and Ellie didn't have to hide. She walked Henry at dawn and again at sunset. She learned the names of neighbors she'd only seen as glimpses of faces behind blinds. She brought a fruit salad to the potluck. She sang carols in December. Henry did his work. When Ellie's blood sugar drifted low, he nudged her until she sat. When she rose too quickly, he braced, still as a pillar. When a storm knocked out the power one sticky August night, Henry kept close in the dark. You only think about electricity when it isn't there. You only think about rights when someone tries to take them away. A few months later, Mr. Mandel asked Ellie if she would mind sharing her experience at a regional HOA training. It helps to hear from real people, he said, not just lawyers. Ellie hesitated. I'm not a public speaker, she replied. He smiled gently. You don't have to be. Just be Ellie. They sat in a hotel conference room with coffee and paper cups and those tiny stir sticks that always look like toothpicks, pretending to be straws. Barbara was there too, seated 2 rows back, listening. I thought I had to choose between the rules and my safety. Ellie told the room. It turned out I didn't. The law made room for both, with a little kindness and patience. She told them about the letters, the meeting, the attorney's clarifying email. She mentioned Henry's tasks without mining her medical history, for more than anyone needed to know. She spoke not as a warrior, but as a neighbor. The room leaned in. Afterward, a young property manager approached her. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I've been so afraid of getting it wrong. I've been getting it wrong. Thank you." Ellie smiled. "Do the process," she said, "and slow down. Let's ground ourselves in what actually changed here, because it's not magic and it's not about winning. It's about clarity. The board learned that the ADA, which many of us know from public spaces, is not the only or even the primary law governing assistance animals and housing. The Fair Housing Act is the key law for homes, condos, and HOAs. Under the FHA, assistance animals include both service animals and emotional support animals. The question isn't, is there a pet? But is there a disability-related need? The board learned that the process matters. Instead of issuing blanket, no exceptions edicts, they engaged in the interactive process, a good faith conversation, a consideration of documentation, a balanced approach to others' needs. The board learned what they could and could not ask for. No pet fees, no forced back entrances. Yes to leashes and control and waste cleanup. Yes to vaccination records. Yes to holding owners responsible for actual damages. The board learned that allergy and fear real. Concerns require practical solutions, not exclusion. Separate seating, air purifiers, communication. That's accommodation, adjusting, not excluding that, and perhaps most importantly, they learned that the person asking isn't a problem. The person is a neighbor. I get this. Question often, what if the disability or the animal's role isn't obvious? What if the person is young and looks fine, or the animal isn't wearing a vest, or the tasks aren't immediately clear? In housing, if the need isn't obvious, the provider may request documentation. That can be a letter from a healthcare professional or another knowledgeable third party confirming that the person has a disability and that the animal helps alleviate symptoms or performs tasks related to that disability. It doesn't require a diagnosis or a long history. It doesn't require certification from a website. It requires honesty, clarity, and respect. When a board receives that documentation, the next step isn't suspicion, it's evaluation. Does the request meet the standard? If yes, the accommodation is granted with reasonable conditions for safety and cleanliness. If not, the board should explain why and explore alternatives. What we avoid always is blanket denials and humiliation. Not. Every story ends with new signs and a potluck. Sometimes a board refuses. Sometimes letters go ignored. That's when the federal structure steps in. Complaints can be filed with HUD or the state's Fair Housing Agency. Fair housing centers can offer mediation and guidance. And yes, sometimes it goes further to attorneys, to litigation. But most of the time, a calm letter and a steady process resolve the issue long before a judge needs to gavel anything. If you're in that spot facing stone walls, remember what Ellie did. She documented. She kept her tone respectful and steady. She sought help from a fair housing center. She followed the process and invited conversation. She held the door open for resolution and walked through it when it appeared. It's important, as adults in a shared world, to acknowledge the elephant or the Labrador in the room. Some people misuse these rules. They slap a vest on a pet and declare it an official animal to bypass policies. That misuse makes life harder for people like Ellie who depend on a trained animal for safety. The answer, however, isn't distrust. It's a better process. Ask the permitted questions. Require reliable documentation when needed. Keep records. Train staff. When the process is consistent, misuse drops, and legitimate needs are honored. One morning in late spring, Ellie stood by the mailboxes, flipping through coupons and church newsletters. A new resident approached, Sophie Martinez, mid-50s, with laugh lines and a careful way of walking. "Miss Hayes?" Sophie asked. "I wanted to say thank you. I moved in last month with my cat, Lila. She's my emotional support animal. I was afraid to ask for an accommodation. Your meeting notes were in the welcome packet. It made it easier." Ellie's eyes glistened. "I'm glad," she said. "How is Lila?" "Bossy," Sophie laughed, "but she makes the panic go quiet." Ellie nodded. "I get it," she said, and Henry nuzzled her hand. Sophie reached into her bag and handed Ellie a still warm blueberry muffin. "For Henry," she said. "For you?" What I love most about Ellie's story is that it didn't create heroes and villains. It created neighbors who learned together. Barbara still runs the board, and she's good at it. She still gets calls at midnight, but she now keeps a binder on her desk labeled Assistance Animals of Guidance, with tabs for letters, forms, and training notes. Jeff still works the lobby and holds the door with a smile. Mr. Mandel still reads rules like novels and asks questions that open windows. She's still Ellie. She still plays Claire de Lune on Tuesday mornings, windows open, to let the music float into the courtyard where the hibiscus blooms. Henry lies at her feet, ears twitching, always ready. Before we close, let me offer the practical steps that came out of this story: gentle, clear, and senior-friendly. Know your rights. In housing, the Fair Housing Act requires reasonable accommodations for assistance animals. That includes service dogs and emotional support animals. Ask properly. Write a short, respectful request. State that you have a disability and that the animal assists you with tasks or alleviates symptoms. Don't overshare medical details. Provide reliable documentation if needed. A brief letter from a healthcare professional is often enough. It doesn't need to include diagnoses, just the necessity. Keep your animal's records current. Vaccinations, license if required, and training to ensure the animal is under control and housebroken. You don't need special certification. Papers from a website. Be a good neighbor. Leash control, cleanup, considerate routes. Print extra copies of your accommodation letter for staff who don't know you yet. Engage in the interactive process. If the board has concerns, meet calmly. Suggest practical solutions like air purifiers or seating adjustments for residents with allergies. Document everything. Keep copies of emails and letters. If someone says no exceptions, ask them to put that in writing. Seek help early. Local fair housing organizations can guide you. If needed, HUD accepts complaints, and many disputes are resolved through mediation without court. On the evening that summer finally softened, Ellie pulled a quilt over her lap and opened the window to the sound of sprinklers ticking in the distance. She thought of the sign that wasn't there anymore, the absolute no exceptions, and how absolute things often change when they meet real people. Henry stirred, then rested his head on her knee. Ellie stroked his ear, that silken triangle. That made him sigh. She remembered the first time he braced for her on the stairs after the stroke. She remembered the first low blood sugar he caught before she knew it was coming. She remembered the volunteer guard, the letter, the meeting, the moment when the attorney's lantern lit the path for the board. "Good boy," she whispered. "We did all right." Outside, the sky held its breath between pink and blue. Inside, the quiet felt earned. If you're watching this and seeing your own lobby, your own letter, your own reluctant board, here's my physician's heart speaking directly to you. Keep your steadiness. You do not have to be loud to be clear. You do not have to be aggressive to be firm. The law recognizes your need because the people who wrote it knew someone like you. They knew a war veteran who sleeps better because a dog rests at his side. They knew a teacher whose balance faltered after a stroke. They knew a student who can leave her apartment because her cat slows her panic down enough to open the door. This is not about special treatment. It's about equal footing, sometimes literally on the floors we all share. Section 26. What the board learned to say one. Last detail that made me smile. A few weeks after the policy session, a new guard started in the lobby. A resident pointed to Henry and said, "No pets." The guard straightened and replied with calm, practiced words, "Assistance animals are welcome here. If you have concerns, I can share our policy." Then he opened the door. Ellie told me later that she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Sometimes the world takes your breath away because it's beautiful. Sometimes it takes your breath away because, for once, it works. Section 27. The doctor and me. The neighbor and you. I'm a physician, so of course I want to talk about safety and health. But I'm also your neighbor in this shared project of living. The story of Ellie and Henry is the story of what happens when we let the best parts of the rules, the parts that protect dignity, rise to the surface. Federal law didn't just change the conversation. It reminded everyone of the point of the conversation in the first place. We make space for one another to live. If you're a board member, this is your invitation to lead with steadiness and to ask better questions. If you're a resident, this is your permission to speak up without fear. If you're the person with the dog at your side, this is your reminder that you belong. Section 28. Closing warmth. Henry will grow old someday, the way we all do. His muzzle will gray, his stride will soften, and another dog may take his place. If that day comes, the path will already be smoother beneath those paws, because one woman wrote a polite letter and took a deep breath in an elevator and trusted that the law could be a lantern if she held it steady. And when someone else steps into that lobby, perhaps a young father with PTSD, perhaps a widow with vertigo, and meets a no pets sign, I hope they find what Ellie found, not an exception, but a welcome. Not a loophole, but a door. As you close this video and step back into your own evening, know that somewhere a neighbor is walking her dog down a hallway that once was off limits, and nothing terrible is happening. The world is quietly intact. The rules are still posted. The carpets are still clean. And a human being is living her life with a little more safety and a little more grace. That's all we're after. That's all we've ever been after. Thank you for spending this time with me. Stay well, stay steady, and if you need to, replay this story the next time a sign tries to tell you who you are. You already know. And the law does too.